What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily. So this year, there are two budget Samsung devices with similar names. The Samsung Galaxy A13 5G and this guy, the A13 4G LTE, or plain old A13 as it's shown on the box. Now, having one 5G version of a phone and one non-5G version isn't unusual. Samsung did this with some phones last year, like the A32. Their differences go beyond just the network capabilities, actually, and they also tend to release 5G devices in certain regions, like the US for example, and 4G devices in other regions. They don't usually compete. But Samsung is selling both the A13 5G and this A13 4G in the US market this year, which is kind of confusing. This whole lineup actually on their website is atrocious. The A12 is still listed here, the A20, which makes no sense, last year's A32. Someone really needs to update this sales page. But if you're in the market for a budget Samsung smartphone and 5G isn't a concern for you, I actually think opting for the regular A13, this 4G LTE model, is a good move. It's the kind of phone I'd describe as having just the essentials. You'll be saving a good chunk of money, especially if you're buying the phone unlocked. The price difference is surprisingly wide, and you'll also wind up with a device that's still comparable to its slightly more capable 5G counterpart. If you want just a side-by-side spec and technical comparison, I already have a dedicated video on the channel for that, and also a separate review for the A13 5G. But for this video, we're going to focus solely on the A13 4G, and I'm going to fill you in on everything you need to know, as if this phone sort of existed by itself. In general, I think it's a pretty decent device, but like all lower tier Samsung A-series phones, you'll have to have some realistic expectations with performance and capabilities. For well under $200 though, I still think there's plenty to like. Physically, this A13 looks about the same as every other A-series phone, though at 6.6 inches, it's, I guess, technically bigger than some of the others in the lineup, but we're talking about a 1/10 of an inch. If you're wanting some size variety, Samsung doesn't really offer that right now, but the big screen on this phone is still a big perk. Like most budget phones, the display is surrounded by some noticeable black bezels. The 83% screen to body ratio isn't awful, but you've still got a thick border surrounding you. In the hand, this phone to me feels lighter and slimmer than its size suggests. It's a little more curvy, which makes it easier to handle. Like I said, it's still a big device though. You're gonna have to stretch and maneuver your hand all around it, but it doesn't feel like you're playing with a brick. Around back, what's sort of interesting here is Samsung just straight up went with a totally different material finish and build compared to the other A-series phones. The A13 is a glossy plastic that's entirely one piece, no metal or aluminum frame, and you can see the difference there with the other A-series phones. To me, this does make the phone feel a little cheaper. The glossy plastic gets fingerprints, it scratches easily, mine definitely has marks from normal use already, and even though I haven't dropped my phone yet, I suspect an especially unlucky drop might also just crack the plastic completely. You can see along the sides and edges how the back cover curves over to meet the edge of the display. Like I said, no metal frame, and while it's curvy and shiny and appears nice at first glance, altogether this build is just not great, and out of everything, to my eyes, this is the cheapest thing about the phone by far. Fortunately though, Samsung didn't cheap out when it comes to all the extra physical features. So there's dual SIM support and an SD card slot for expandable storage, which is definitely essential on this phone because most places will likely be selling the 32 or 64 gig version like I have here, and I think you'll need an SD card slot for at least some of your stored stuff. At the bottom, the OG headphone jack is still there if you prefer it, and on the side of the phone, a combo power button fingerprint sensor setup that, to be honest, feels a little slow even for this kind of budget device, but I think my expectations are just a little high. It takes a second to wake and unlock, but it's not finicky, it doesn't fail or prompt me to retry ever. It just requires an extra fraction of a second before you get into the phone. As far as the display, the regular A13 in my opinion offers a pretty good viewing experience for what it is, but depending on your preferences, you may think otherwise. The 6.6 inch screen is a PLS LCD panel, coming in at the Full HD 2408 by 1080 resolution, cramming in some 400 pixels per inch, and it's covered by Gorilla Glass 5. What's great about this display, first off, is the resolution. It doesn't sound like 1080p should even be a talking point, but the A13 5G, for example, has a 720 resolution screen, which at this size just doesn't look very sharp. And some of Motorola's phones also ship with 720p displays. When you have a massive display like this, you need a 1080 resolution display, and this phone checks that box. The PLS LCD panel to me is also pretty good. It's colorful, it's bright enough. It's no OLED though, like we used to get on some of the older, cheaper A series phones. I do think Samsung's LCD panels though are built better or maybe calibrated better than some other budget devices. Again, Motorola comes to mind as a less bright, less colorful looking display by comparison. What you don't get here though is any high refresh rate, but I also don't think we're gonna see that widespread on sub $200 devices anytime soon, so that's okay. That is something you do get on the A13 5G though. To me, all in all, the simple screen setup is more than sufficient, and I don't have any big complaints. With the out loud listening experience, this phone has what I suspect is about the same single speaker setup that's been inside most budget Samsung phones for likely the last 3 or 4 years now. Can you use it to listen to music or watch a video? Sure, but it's not very loud. And to me, improving the out loud setup here is a cheap and easy way to get some added value on a phone like this. So I hope Samsung makes some improvements for the next A series. When it comes to the specs and performance, this is where you need to sort of evaluate your daily smartphone needs and also have some realistic expectations about a device at this price point. Now inside, this phone is powered by Samsung's own Exynos 850, which is kind of an older processor now. It came out in the fall of 2019, and here are the updated Geekbench scores if you want to do some comparisons. Obviously, it's just a super low-level chipset, and paired with either 3 or 4 gigs of RAM, processing power as a whole is fairly limited. Also, this is a Samsung device that does run on One UI Core, but especially on Android 12, I don't really see that being a net negative. You don't miss out on a whole lot of features, and I doubt most people would know the difference. As far as what this phone can do, jumping from Android app to Android app, the usual core stuff is perfectly fine. You're gonna see a load screen. It's gonna take a fraction of a second to pull something up, but this is a 2022 smartphone from Samsung. It's not incapable of doing anything. Sure, it's going to lag a bit when you start to push it. Some apps do run better than others on this phone, and while 4 gigs of RAM used to kind of be okay on a smartphone, I found myself closing out of everything more often just to be safe. Though honestly, even with dozens of apps open, the phone is able to keep a number of them current. Is a device like this going to hold up during a very busy workday? I mean, maybe it can, but this is more for just folks who need something easy and simple to talk, text, and communicate with friends and family. You can look something up on the web, use Google Maps, watch a YouTube video. You can game on this thing too, actually. Once you get past the initial longer than average launch screens, I would say 4 out of 5 games I tried played fairly smoothly. So sure, you can stay entertained too, but that's not really what this phone is for, I don't think. It's a device for people who don't care about 5G, who don't care about the bells and whistles, who don't need the fastest, most spec'd, most over-the-top thing, and likely for folks who want $100-ish device and nothing more. That's exactly what the regular A13 is. I will say that if it's in your budget though, buying something even $50 or $100 more than this will yield you a significantly better device performance-wise, so keep that in mind. But again, I don't know that that's a huge concern if you're seriously considering a device like this anyway. With all those lower end specs, one thing that's helped is the battery life. Samsung crammed a 5,000 milliamp battery inside this phone, which is big, beefy, and it'll absolutely get you through the day and then some. And honestly, for a lot of people, I can see this being a 2-day device at least with lighter use. The 15-watt wired charging speeds are also fast enough to get you back up to 100% in a reasonable time frame, so battery life and longevity should not be a concern on a device like this whatsoever. The other somewhat limiting factor with a phone like this is in the camera department, but honestly, I think we all just have such high expectations with camera tech now that we forget that something like this will still get the job done. Around back, the camera setup consists of a 50 megapixel main lens, a 5 megapixel ultra-wide lens, which is not something that's offered on the 5G A13 by the way, a 2 megapixel macro lens, and a 2 megapixel depth sensor. The selfie camera is an 8 megapixel shooter, and inside the camera app, I would argue that all the core essentials are here that would allow you to take a good enough picture for most conditions. Like I mentioned, the wide angle is a big perk. I find it to be the most useful secondary lens out of everything, and it's odd that many budget phones don't offer it. The main lens can shoot up to the full 50 megapixels, which tends to give you more detail, and and the camera app has a couple shooting mode add-ons to choose from. There's a very simple pro camera mode, but besides that, the rest are just filters and functions you'd use sparingly. And more essential stuff like enhanced stabilization for video or even a dedicated night mode are noticeably absent. Those things I think should be on a phone like this. Still, in the right conditions, this phone takes a perfectly average looking image. You can tell it's a budget phone for sure. Not so great dynamic range, pictures get overexposed fairly easily, dark areas get lost. Nighttime shooting is just not great. The detail overall is okay in most pictures, but you're certainly limited by the less powerful processor. The bottom line though is that if you just need to take a quick pic at a family outing, it's perfectly fine. Like I said, camera tech is one of those things that's advanced so much so quickly, and jumping back to a phone like this makes things a bit difficult to defend at times, but it still is going to get the job done. So all in all, the regular A13 is no doubt intended for folks who just need a phone, any phone, to stay connected to the world. It's not flashy, it's not fancy, but it offers enough of the core features to make most people happy, so long as your expectations are realistic. More than likely, you'll be paying well under $200 for this phone, and maybe under $100 from a carrier if you get a deal. And that's a price you can't beat for a current 2022 Samsung device, even if it is a bit slow at times. For daily essentials, it's a perfectly fine phone with no frills, but if you have the means, a $50 to $100 price jump will yield you a significant bump up in specs and overall capabilities on a different device than this, so just keep that in mind. So there you go, those are my thoughts on the regular old A13 4G LTE. What do you guys think about this phone? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, of course. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video though. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.